Jill, welcome to the platform. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing
Good.
good. Trying to be like everybody else in Dodge. This Omicron, Delta, and whatever
Right.
else variant is going on. Just trying to stay safe.
Right. I understand that totally. Me too.
How's your 2022 start off? How's it been?
2022 has been, it started off with a blast, of course, a lot going on,
Right.
but it's been good. I think I have kind of reset, and when you reset, you are motivated to get some
Right.
things done. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Well, I'm ready to get into this conversation. I'm ready to,
Okay.
find out a little more about you and your journey, and then some COB stuff, and then some policing stuff, and then some more
Okay.
Nashville policing stuff, and see where we at, and really also be able to educate our Nashville listeners and viewers about more about COB work and
Right.
how they can be a part of that, right? Because it's for the community.
That's correct. Okay,
Um,
sure.
so can you just give us a little background about just who Jill is and
Yeah.
who you are and like what you like to do and what you don't like to do and people you like, people you don't like.
No. Okay. So I moved to Nashville. I think it was in '95. Before that I lived in Washington D.C. I was a police officer in Washington D.C. a little shy of 5 years, and I moved to Nashville because I had a support system here. My family's originally from West Tennessee. And so, I had relatives here, and so I just thought it would be a good place to raise my children. DC raising children alone as a single parent was getting to be a little bit much for me, and so I was like, well, I can go to Tennessee. That's where I got some support there, and it was it was a big change for me because I had lived in major cities, and so coming to Nashville in the '90s was different than it is now. And so, but we have been here since that time, and it's just been, this is, I think, I've lived here longer than I've lived anywhere. So this is
Right.
home for me. My children were raised here, and I just have been working here and moving around in my career, trying to find my niche.
Right.
And before I became the executive director at the Community Oversight Board, I was the chief criminal investigator at the Public Defender's Office, where I spent 11 years at that space.
Wow, here in Nashville.
Here in Nashville, and then I also I've worked a few different places, but
Right.
some of the more significant places was the Public Defender's Office. I worked in probation and parole.
Right.
I've also worked at, I worked for the YW many years ago. So I was assigned to a program at the women's prison, so I
Right.
did a lot of work over there as a program manager at the women's prison.
Okay.
And so I just have really, it took me, just like anyone else trying to figure out what they wanted to do, I think
Right.
it took me a little while to figure out that, helping people is my
Right.
motivation.
Right.
Giving back to the community is what I think I'm all about,
Right.
in whatever way that I can do that.
Right.
And that looks different for everyone,
Right.
right? And so I'm married. I'm a mother, and so
Right.
that's what I've been doing. And so what I like to do, I like quiet time.
Okay.
I like to have peaceful time for myself, reading, bowling, just kind of some of the stuff. I'm big on animals,
Okay.
and I like being out in nature,
Right.
and recycling. So,
Okay.
so
We can
those-
do better about that.
Yeah.
Especially here. We can do better about that. No, that's awesome. Awesome. What during your adolescent, young adult life that kind of geared you toward or inspired you or motivated you towards to get into the criminal legal system, law enforcement? Like, was it something like pivotal that said, this is kind of the lane I want to be in, and then figure out my niche? Influences?
I think that, my mother was a teenager when she had me. And so, living with my aunt and uncle, my mother's sister, my uncle was in the military. He was I wouldn't say he was a stern disciplinarian, but you know how military families can be.
Right.
But when I lived with my mother, I think I was at some point, just dealing with when you have a parent that is a teenager and I think that I had experiences that just kind of molded me in such a way that I knew that some change needed to happen in my life.
Right.
And so I wouldn't say that I had a trauma-filled existence or childhood, but there was some issues there that,
Right.
I had to work through, and I think that that is what guided me towards, wanting to work in the law enforcement field. And then also in that, I think when you think about I want to go into law enforcement, I think that I had like, okay, I can do better for other people,
Right.
so they wouldn't have to experience what I experienced. Like you go in, like I want to be a help.
Right.
And so I think that's what happened with me. And then, of course, within the police department, you
Right.
try to figure out which way you want to go.
If you want to go a little deeper, like what happened to you that made you want to say, "Hey, I want to get in this so this doesn't happen to others"? Any specific?
Well, I mean,
incidents?
there's things, I had some juvenile trouble as a child.
Oh, you?
Yes, so, I think that I'm just, I think that all young people, there's some pivotal moments that you
Right.
have. And when you have those moments, you want to you figure through them, right? You go
Right.
through them and figure out like what is this?
Right.
How do I handle this? And as a child, as a teenager, those things are very heavy for you to carry. And so sometimes you as you're trying to figure things out, you have people that come into your life that either mentor you
Right.
or help you figure out this route that you need to go.
Right.
And I think that that's what happened to me. And so, having trouble in my as a youth, and then deciding I want to move and do something different. I want to give back because I felt like empowered by the people who were helping me.
Right.
And so that's what I did.
Did you ever, when you was thinking about getting in law enforcement, policing, did the historical harm that has been bestowed on Black folks specifically by police, by the criminal legal system, law enforcement, did that weigh on your decision or played into thinking about getting into that role? Because we know, as Black folks, we most of us understand even if we haven't experienced, we've seen it or heard stories, and we tend to kind of be harder on our family members, or our peers, or our friends, and maybe in a joking way too, but maybe it'd be some seriousness in it when they say, "Hey, I want to be a police officer. I want to go to law enforcement." You're like, okay. It's the first thing. In many of us, the first thing that'll come to mind is like, yeah, do that, right? Because of like so many things we have indirectly or directly experienced. Right. Just with law enforcement, policing, and the criminal legal system here.
Yeah. So I don't think that was my route. I do think that because I was living with my aunt and uncle and it was military.
Right.
I initially wanted to go into the military, right? Because
Okay.
sometimes as children you make decisions like based on like what is my family doing?
Right.
Like if your dad's a teacher, you might want to become a teacher. Your
Right.
mom's a teacher, you want to be a teacher or a doctor or whatever. And so, I wanted to go into the military, not really knowing what job I wanted in the military. I never thought about being a police officer in the
Right.
military. As long as whatever I had, as long as I didn't have to go out and stay in the woods. I was
Right.
like, what? I don't want to live in the woods. But I did have family members who had encounters with law enforcement. And in the 90s, it was, and just being, frank, there was this big crack epidemic.
Right.
And, I saw how that was, really taking over the lives of people, especially people of color, right? And so living in Washington, D.C., it was just really uncontrollable. It was out of control.
Right.
And so what I loved about DC is you saw people who were empowered to do stuff, right? They were, speaking about the issues.
Right.
I was young and not really necessarily understanding what was happening.
Right.
But I knew that there was something that I could do. What my part was, I wasn't really sure.
Right.
And so when I decided, I had, ran into some people and just began to network with them and talk about career choices.
Right.
And they were like, well, the police department would be, you probably would do really well. And I was like, I don't know about that, carrying a gun.
Right.
But the more that I spent time with them, the more I realized that this might be an area where I could help, because what
Right.
I was seeing in Washington, D.C. didn't make me feel good, right?
Right.
When you see people, teenagers, young people, young parents on, addicted on drugs and hanging out and just all the stuff that comes along with that.
Right.
I did have a sense of what can I do to give back, basically.
What was some of the I guess some of the things you worked on as a police officer in DC? Because I know it's different departments. I know, like, I don't know all the police lingo, but it's like investigations, narcotics, gang units, stuff like that.
Yeah, so in DC, which I love, there was opportunity to move around, and so I did. So I was detailed to the Narcotics and Special Investigations Division, not for a very long time, but long enough to do undercover prostitution.
Okay.
I worked in my own precinct doing that same stuff, as well as I was in this the Special Operations Division, where I worked in the Special Events branch.
Right.
So that particular branch also handled the movement of the president. So there are times where I might have been at the Blair House, not often, but a few times, and just working wherever they needed us in that particular department. I started in patrol, though, in the 7th precinct.
Now, you kind of went past it real quick, but you said you undercover prostitution. So,
I did that,
so you played the role of a prostitute, or did you?
I don't know if I played the role.
How would you work? I don't know how to. I guess that's the best wording that came to my mind.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of that was real.
You was undercover.
Yes.
Wow.
And it was just running rampant in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And so, and it was, like I said, it was really connected to narcotics, right? And so.
Can you take us through a bust?
Take you through a bus.
Yeah, take me.
Well, one thing about it in DC, you could not dress as a prostitute. Like, you had to have regular clothes on, because there was this whole thing about entrapment.
Okay.
So you couldn't like dress up in like something like overly sexy. You know, you just had on regular jeans.
Right.
And then they used me to deal with people who were pimps, basically, and they, is a whole covert operation, but that was a big problem in the 90s in Washington, D.C. as well.
Wow. Because now I'm just thinking about like all of the like law enforcement shows, and then like movies I've seen, like, and I've never met somebody, right, or knew somebody like that actually like was undercover and had to like get in, like study and know what to do, and very covert operations.
It was a lot of work. I mean,
how's that on you mentally?
I mean, it was my job, so I kind of switched, like, it's my job, I'm gonna do my job, but I think that when you realize that in those particular situations, like you learn like this culture that you weren't exposed to,
right?
And when you hear things like like this whole pimp culture was really something that was challenging, because they're talking like they're running game, right? And you're like, what? And you can see how someone who is kind of who may have been easily influenced by that, right? You have someone who's a smooth talker, who is an influencer, and then you can understand a lot more why the things happen the way that they happen with women in general.
Wow.
But that culture that you see, like, it was real in Washington, D.C.,
Wow.
Yeah, it was a little, and those times were a little crazy. But
Right. So you learned a little pimp game.
Just a little.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's crazy. Now, during this journey in law enforcement policing, what were some of the things that you noticed whether any part of that journey where you notice that there's maybe that you could do more, that you can find a different lane in, just rather than just being undercover or doing patrol and doing something more, I guess, outside of the uniform, but still in the law enforcement criminal legal system.
Like in what way?
So, for example, you may have noticed maybe disparities.
Oh, yeah.
Or you may have noticed just some systemic challenges. Even for yourself as a black woman, it might have been some glass ceilings that you said, okay, well, maybe I need to find something kind of different to navigate into where I can still be just as impactful or more, but it's not limitation. It's not maybe playing. I don't have to have a double conscious type of thing.
Yeah, I think that. So when you're talking about Washington D.C., you know this whole concept of Chocolate City.
Right.
You know what I will say that I'll tell you two ways. So what I appreciated was seeing so many people of color, especially women, in leadership roles in the police department. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was way more than I see even today. And so I always thought about, like, this is like a pathway to what, like my first experience with one of the women that I looked up to, Sergeant Peacock at the time. She was in our academy class. So seeing women in those leadership positions kind of made you feel like, I can do this. You were comfortable, right? And so, but of course, the moment you release from the academy, you're in the real world, right? And you see there were disparities. There was like racial issues amongst the officers, white officers and black officers. I had that experience myself. You're also, as a woman in this very male-dominated career field, in world and culture, there's a whole lot that goes into that too. With, I'm not going to necessarily say it was misogyny, but I would say it was sexism. There were, things that were happening that happens, I think, in any culture where it's a male-dominated culture. And so...
how did you navigate that? How did you...
I think for me, you just... I think at some point it became like, I'm not about to tolerate that, right? You're not going to talk to me like that. You're not going to, and then, I didn't have a problem with, letting people in charge know that this was happening. And I think that is what has to happen, right? Someone has to be courageous and speak up. Because if you don't, then you just kind of are siloed and experiencing something alone and feeling like you're alone. And it could be that you would be ostracized.
Did you feel that way once you spoke up? Did you feel like you was actually listened to?
I did.
Okay,
I think
good.
that how that fell in that way is because the person or the persons that I reported in issues to did something about it and supported me, right? And so I have to give big ups to those particular leaders that did something about it.
What advice would you give women today that might even be young women that may be thinking about a career in law enforcement and potentially policing? What kind of advice would you give them today?
I would say be courageous, right? Set your boundaries and your standards. Be an officer of integrity. And when things are not right, be brave, be courageous, and stand up for yourself. And I know that's easier said than done in certain cultures, but I would say that to any young woman, right? That it's not easy to step outside of the norms, but you have to put yourself first, right? You have to say, this is not right, and I'm not going to tolerate it.
So let's move here to Nashville.
Okay.
We're in Nashville now. You're here in Nashville now. What are some of the comparison contrastions that you can kind of see between DC and Nashville? Just initially when you came down here and what were some of the compare and contrast things that you initially noticed about maybe their policing criminal legal system compared to what we do here in Nashville?
Well, first off, we're talking about Washington, D.C. There's lots of diversity, right? And we're talking about a police department that had, probably right around 5,000 officers. We're talking about a major, metropolitan city.
Right.
So you come here, and the police department is, it's smaller. It was, the feel was a little more southern. Downtown didn't look like it looks now.
Right.
I noticed that there weren't a whole lot of, black people or people of color in general in key positions, which was different because in Washington, D.C., at the time we had a black mayor.
Right.
There were lots of leadership positions for people of color. And so that was something that I noticed right away. And then, of course, I noticed that there was a huge pay difference. So, so I think that was some of the things. And I didn't really take a whole lot of notice within the police department because, I was, focusing on something else. I was like,
Right.
I'm done with policing.
Right.
Not that it was bad. I think that if I would have stayed in Washington, D.C., had the support, because I didn't want to raise my kids in an area and not have that support.
Right.
I probably would have stayed on a police department.
Right.
A lot of my friends were police officers retired from there as
Right.
well. So,
What were some of the? I know we talked a little bit off camera, but what were some of the roles, like key roles, significant roles that you were a part of here in Nashville around law enforcement, criminal legal system before entering the Community Oversight Board and being the executive director?
So I worked. Some of the significant roles, I think, is I worked for the YWCA as a program manager over at the women's prison. I taught a program over there called the New Start program. It was like a pre-release program for women who were going up for parole.
Oh, okay.
And that really had a big impact on me, because I felt, being able to help women prepare, for their next step, their next journey. It was set up by Charles Trauber, who thought that there had to be some type of release program, right? I mean, some kind of program before release.
Right.
And it was really supposed to help recidivism. And so as looking through the curriculum, we made changes to it. But it also was very hard because every day I was in the prison with women, right? And so you went in the morning, you worked really hard, you stayed all day because it was difficult to even go out for lunch. You had to go through all this process of being checked in your purse and searched and all this stuff. And so, but I did that, I want to say, a little over a year. It was a lot for me. But it was very rewarding, and I think that I made an impact on many of the women that I encountered there.
What impact did that have on you?
I just felt like, there's only so much that you can do. Right? You try your hardest, you just like when you have women going through to the parole board. You prepare them, and then they don't make parole, right? And so that was kind of disheartening. I will say that a few women that I worked with ended up getting paroled, and I was very happy about that. But the impact was I think it's just having a mental awareness that you are incarcerated. Every day that you work there, because it's difficult to leave, come back, leave, and where it's located, it's not like you got lunch choices, so
it's not like a food hall.
It's not like, so it's like, it's not like it is now, where you've got a little more stuff to choose from. Back then, where the women's prison is, it was kind of like secluded and siloed off. I mean, purposely. But it was difficult work. And it's also just difficult seeing all the trauma that these women are experiencing. Like, even some of them are incarcerated for things that happened to them that, they were victimized, right? So I think all of that weighed heavy on me, and I was like, I got to do something different,
So what was that something different?
So when I left there, I did a little work with the Department of Human Services, working for the Families First program, still trying to find it and, but still trying to help people. So I did that for a while. Then I went over to probation and parole. I stayed there for a good long while. Which was different, and then, but in probation and parole, I ended up with an all-women's caseload. It was a pilot program, and so I'm back working with women, and that was challenging too because women get out of prison, and when they get out of prison, they become like I'm their parole officer, and they don't necessarily want to stay in Nashville. Right. They want to go, they want to go wherever they're from. They don't, they really don't have a plan.
Right.
And so you try to work and navigate through that. And I'm like, it seems like I'm trying to run their lives,
right.
And I just want them, to do the best and not get locked up again, right?
Right. And probation and probationary fees and stuff is something that was it's been like a hot topic.
Yes.
When you was doing that, what were some of the challenges or barriers, I think, that you may have noticed just within the probationary system? Because I have friends that really close friends, like brothers of mine, that have been incarcerated, and they had to be on parole or probation, and it seems like those systems, from how they explain it to me, create a lot of barriers for them to adjust and create a really solid foundation to reacclimate to society and really feel free.
Right. I think that we have to really rethink probation and parole, right? I think that when we look at from the inside out, probation and parole is like you are. You have a caseload and you're monitoring what these people do. They're on your caseload.
Right.
But you as a probation, if you're the probation or the parole officer, you have to look at how can you help people move out of this system and this thinking that they're still part of a punitive system, because they are,
Right.
They have fees, they have to have a job, they have to be drug tested, they can't leave all these check-ins, they can't leave. So it doesn't necessarily make people feel like they have been, empowered to do better, right? Or empowered to move beyond what their charge was, right? And so, how do we do that as a society? Are we always going to keep bringing up a person's past, right? And every time they have to go in the probation office and take a urine test or whatever it is, I think that just keeps people in this mindset that I'm still in this system.
Right.
And, I don't know the right answer for that, but I do think that we need to be moving towards what's restorative. And, that I still can't figure out the perfect way, what that looks like.
Right.
But I do think that is something that as a community we should be thinking about. What are some of the best restorative practices?
Right.
And fees, you get out of, immediately they want you to get a job.
Right.
Well, you've been arrested or you got a record,
It's
kind of difficult to get a job, right?
Right.
And so I think that really probation and parole has a responsibility to be connecting with the community members or the business partners to find out, will you take people with these types of records, right? Can we take them and create some kind of training program?
Right.
And then connect them to employment. What is the responsibility of the state or the probation and parole office to do a part that stops recidivism? Right? I think some of the responsibility lies on them as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it just amazes me sometimes that we have systems that are supposed to help folks, but they kind of harm and make things a little more difficult. Intentionally or unintentionally, they just are difficult, and just really challenging, especially for people who have just been recently incarcerated, and just trying to find their way.
Right, and what I found is knowledge is power, right? And there's not a whole lot of knowledge given to people. I think there's this idea that sometimes, when you get out, you out, you can't always go connect with the same people that you've been connected with before you got, arrested and incarcerated, because that may not be healthy for you, right? And so I think that we have to, as a community, we have to think about ways to give of our time, think about what's restorative, and what people need is shelter, employment, so they have to have housing, employment, and they have to have, safety nets.
Right.
Right? They have to have
Right.
people that they can trust and that safety net to help them move forward.
Right.
Right?
So after that,
It's like a lot. I know I just blah, blah, blah.
no,
but
no,
yeah.
no. After that, I know you told me you spent 11 years in the DA's office,
No, at the public defender's office.
public defender's office.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, the public defender's office, sometimes it gets a bad rap. Sometimes people appreciate it. Me personally, I don't believe the public defender's office is given the right amount of financial resources so they can really give people the right representation that they deserve, equitable representation that they deserve, unfortunately. And that's how you get the term like public pretenders.
Right.
So what was your role?
I think that public defenders, the whole concept, of, I think that there's a lot of people that come in contact with public defenders, and number one, they're under resourced, right? Number one, you have high caseloads, and so I think that that's why you get this bad rap, because the cases are high. Not a lot of people just want to spend their, they get out of college, they finish law school, and then they go work at the public defender's office. It's not, they're not paid well because most of them are under resourced, and so that is that perception that they're public pretenders. But I tell you, I worked here and people worked really hard. Right? We worked really hard on some of the most, like any kind of case you can think of.
Right.
And it was very fulfilling work to me. I felt like I was making a difference in people's lives. I might not have been able to give them the answers or the outcomes that they were expecting because it just didn't line up.
Right.
But I did my job, and I think that I provided them with the most resources and information that I could as an investigator. And we knocked on the doors, right? We went out looking for answers, and respected. I think it has a lot to do with respecting the person that you're dealing with, right? And that kind of leans into that procedural justice, right? That, respecting what the person has to say, making certain that they're heard, responding to their calls. Because sometimes you're the last person, the only person that a person who's incarcerated, or individual is incarcerated, may ever get to talk to, right? A lot of people are incarcerated now who don't have money on their books and who don't have anyone to talk to except for their attorney or the investigator or the legal assistant. Right. And so just humanizing people, that, they may be in trouble. They may be in big trouble, right? And they may have been charged with a horrendous event. Right. But they still have a process to go through. Right. And just like anyone else, we need to make certain that process is done correctly and fairly, and it falls in line with the Constitution, right? Right. And we need to do that. Right. And so I think that's what we did.
So now you are the executive director of the COB, Community Oversight Board.
Yes.
The COB, in itself as an entity, started off pretty feisty, I would say. The community wanted it, right? Community wanted it.
Right.
A lot of community organizations played a part here in Nashville in making sure getting people out to vote. And I think maybe how many people voted?
About 80. Oh, you mean total, like 154,000, something like that. Yeah.
People say, hey, the community spoke. Right. But the community spoke, but the COB wasn't getting, maybe the respect maybe is the right word, from our Metro Police Department, MNPD. So, it could do its job properly, effectively. During some of that going back and forth, I can't even remember his name, but right now it was a previous executive director stepped away
Right.
from that, and now here you are.
Yes.
What was that transition like for you in the midst of like so much that was going on between MNPD, COB, and COB trying to do its job? It's really hard because MNPD is creating a lot of red unnecessary tape and not.
It was a lot.
Yeah, so in essentially like not, I would say maybe it's fair to say not maybe honoring the MOU that was established between both parties. How was that transition like, and you being right there in the middle of everything going down?
Yeah, so 6 months in, I became the executive director. And at that time, we weren't really established, right? We did not have an MOU at that time.
Okay.
And, we were having trouble getting records. One of the things that if you look back in hindsight, would we have started the investigation process that right then? But we did. And so we started that investigation process before we had any ground rules in place, because we wanted to be able to help community members, right? And so, I think that's where the beginning of a backlog started, to be honest with you.
Right.
So I take over this. We're 6 months in. I have a team, but I also know that we are, trying to figure out our niche, where we need to go, what's next, right? And then, so that was in December of 2019. February comes. Then March comes, and then there's a tornado, right? Then a pandemic right away, right in the beginning stages of my leadership, and transitioning from having more hands-on to working from home. There's a pandemic. You can't go outside. Then you're trying to work through a tornado and help people and restore that. It was a challenge. I mean, it was probably the hardest work I've ever had to do in my entire life. And I've had some tough times, right, in jobs. But the beginning stages was, I think, some of the most challenging work, because it's like, what do we do next? Like, you've got this, you've got that, you've got expectations from a board. You've got the police department who aren't cooperating, or they act like, okay, well, you can get that, but you put a request in or something, and it takes a long time to get it. Everything's redacted, so it's kind of useless to you.
Right.
I mean, it was a lot going on that we wanted also the public to know.
Right.
And then you're trying to adjust. The police department's trying to adjust as well with this pandemic. How are we doing this? And at the time, you have to remember, we had one mayor and then a new mayor. Right? Then we had one chief and then a new chief. So all of this is happening and playing out in real time in the first year of the COB. And so I think that, for me, it was, I can't just, it's not, the things aren't going the way that I want them to go. There's a whole lot of red tape and pushback. I knew that going in. But from a different perspective. And I think, like I said, it was very challenging. There were many times that I wanted to give up and throw in the towel. But I also knew that, I took this endeavor and I realized it was purpose. It wasn't just a job. And purpose doesn't just come and end, and come and go, right? It's not. It doesn't work that way. And so I said, I'm going to keep at it. I don't know how to do it yet, right? and what is, but I'm going to figure it out as we go. And I have, I had a supportive board, like, but they have their own, this is the thing. We have a board, they're volunteers. And, I promise you, this board over those years have given way more, I think, than anyone really even knows, right? They have dedicated so much time and effort to this board, right? Either through their time in meetings,
Right.
the consultations that I had with them on the phone, just so much stuff. I just don't even know where to begin. It was just so much.
Right.
It's so much.
And let's talk about that a little bit, because there is the Metro Community Oversight board, and then there's the Community Oversight Board.
Right.
And so a lot of community members are, I think, familiar with the board, and they see the meetings, but then y'all, which are volunteers from the community that are elected, voted.
Elected by council.
It's kind of elected by council.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like
the staff,
right?
Yeah.
Can you break that down? That relationship.
So the board is made up of 11 people who are appointed or elected by the city council. You have 7 who are come through from the community or self-appointed. Community organizations nominate them, or they self-appoint and get 50 signatures. You have 2 on the board who are council selections, and 2 who are mayor selections.
Okay.
And so but the staff is made up. It is not separate. We do the day-to-day operations for the Community Oversight Board. The reason why we call ourselves the MNCO is what was happening in the very beginning was community members were calling board members to handle things that should be handled by the staff.
Gotcha.
And so what we did was we wanted to kind of make this distinction that we are the one that you would call for complaints, or
Right.
you don't want you calling board members in the middle of the night saying,
Right.
these things happen, right?
Right.
And that was happening.
Right.
And so we did that in order so the community members knew that this is who you would reach out to.
Okay.
The board members handle, they are over our agency. And so, but they are, we are, the entire staff are government workers, civil servants. And they, except for me, I am a at-will employee. And so I work for the board,
Right.
and then I have a staff of 9.
Okay.
And so right now our agency is we have been for the last 3 years with just 10 people.
Wow.
Trying to get this work done, but we had a budget we did put a budget request in
Right.
to expand our agency, because we've been able to, for the last 3 years, determine where our needs are and
Right.
what we need in order to expand and to solidify
Right.
the work that we can do in this community.
Right. Have Nashville residents been taking advantage of the resources that you all offer, being able to call in an agency that is separate from police, in order and be able to make a complaint about something they may feel like they was, discriminated against, maybe use of force, excessive use of force, all the things they could possibly, I guess, a citizen can encounter and feel wrong about police. Do you feel like our community is utilizing the resources there? And
I think so.
Okay.
I think that the more that the community knows, that's why we have to get a community liaison. We have to get us a social media, person
Right.
that can manage our stuff, so that we're out there and they know that this is a service for them.
Okay.
So I think that, if you put it in context of in 2020, we had 30, a little bit over 30 complaints.
Okay.
And in 2021, we had 75.
Wow.
So it has been, it's
Right.
been this increase because some people don't know about us, and somebody might tell them they might not even live here. They may have
Right.
just had an encounter while they were here over the weekend.
Right.
Right? So we have those kind of calls as well. So it's not just
Okay.
people who have been living in our community
Right.
and residing here. It can be people who are visiting.
Right. So take me through a process. If I call you all's office and say, hey, I want to file a complaint against this officer. This is his or her badge number. This is what happened. What's the next steps?
So you can do that by 3 ways. You can
Okay.
do it, we have a 24-hour complaint line. We also you can do it on the web.
Okay.
You can do it on our Facebook page
Oh,
or
wow.
our social media accounts.
Okay.
And you can also do it through Hub Nashville.
Okay.
And so, or you can call the office, of course, or walk in.
Right.
And so what happens is we have an intake process. Right now it's doing, the investigators do it, but we're trying to move, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, trying to move that intake process to a social worker.
Okay.
But you would call in, an investigator would take your complaint, you know, assign it to someone, and then start the process of finding out what happened. The number one thing that always has to happen is, you know, determining the jurisdiction of the complaint. Like, because sometimes what happens, people call in and they want to make complaints against security officers. Like, we can't handle that.
Right.
Or they want to complain against, you know, maybe someone from the fire department, right? Or the, you know, the city jail.
Right.
Right, and we don't have that jurisdiction, right? At this point, right, right now. But so we have to find that out, or sometimes it's just officers from another county.
Right.
You know, even like right now, you think of Berry Hill, which it's an incorporated city within Nashville.
Right.
But we don't have jurisdiction over Berry Hill Police Department.
Wow.
We don't have jurisdiction over the Bellmead Police Department or Brentwood. And so even though parts of it is in Davidson County, we only have jurisdiction over the Metro Nashville Police Department. So figuring that out first and foremost. And sometimes that's a little difficult because they may not know what police department it is. So the investigators spend time trying to find jurisdiction. And then we go through this process of getting reports, getting 911 calls, taking up videos, and asking for body-worn camera footage. And then that's how the process of the investigation starts.
What does Oversight look like right now with COB and MNPD? Because I don't think, because I know, because, you know, I've been in meetings that understand, you know, accountability and really like, and what that really means and what that really looks like, and oversight, what that really means and what that really looks like for police officers in Nashville. What role, for people who may not know, does the COB play in that oversight and accountability and making sure that procedures and policies are meeting community standards and equitable standards and just standards?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think accountability, what we've been able to do is to look at their policies and procedures. And also, you know, I'm not going to discount the complaint line, right? Because that's sometimes how we are even put on notice that an issue is happening, right? So I think, but if we want to talk about like accountability and how it looks like through policy change, what happens is we have a research team and we look at some of the things. Sometimes we sit around the office and make determinations on like, let's look at these issues, whether it be how many times that the police department is using use of force through K9. Or, you know, how many times are they using their weapons? We get that data. We have an agreement in place, an MOU in place to get the data to determine what we want to, you know, what's happening. You got to have the data, right? The police department has it. They've been keeping track of it. And so they are sharing that information with us. So I think that's great. Having access to that data is how we can look over it and see where the need is for accountability. And so what we've been able to do is write policy advisory reports where we find that there's, you know, some concern. And for instance, when the George Floyd situation happened, you know, there was this thing out called the 8 Can't Wait. And so we, you know, ourselves created a policy advisory report in using that language and found out that the chokehold policy, you know, the police department had made some changes to it, but what we did was had added more stuff in there. And so we had, you know, we had some board members. I think at the time we had the chief forensic pathologist in the state on our board. So we talked to her and, you know, sit down and with the research team, and they wrote a policy that was beefed up, that really had more information than the regular chokehold, right? To say, you know, not only is a chokehold banned, but even putting your knee on someone's neck should be banned as well.
And it's a whole website for those who listening and watching, it might be 8can'twait.com or something like that. But if you Google it, you can literally see your states or your cities, like if they have the 8, kind of policies in place,
Right.
or if they don't, you know.
And Metro adopted that. And then they also adopted, our language and
Right.
put that in their policy. And so I think that that's where the collaboration comes.
Right.
Because ultimately what we want is the best police department in the country, right? We want our policies to be strong. I mean, because it protects our community members, it protects them as well.
Right.
And when we have that collaboration as it pertains to policy, and that's where accountability, I think, really comes in.
What role does the COB play in use of force? Because I think that's when it comes to policies and procedures, and if there's any gray area anywhere, I think it comes to use of force, because I think that's what's dramatized the most. That's what's seen on television, whether it's somebody is shot, tased, taken down, something physical, right? What role does the COB play in the use of force procedures with MNPD now? And has there been some changes? Have they been, kind of flexible and also just, taking some accountability, like, oh, okay, we've been doing this wrong?
Yeah, I would say, so MNPD, we have, had conversations about their use of force, and they recently changed their use of force policy. I mean, when we get complaints, we are looking at the policies. Every time we get a complaint, we are comparing it to the policy.
Right.
And I will say that they are, they have been open to that on the changes in the policy. So, for instance, we just did a policy advisor report on soft, empty hand control, right? Because they weren't reporting that.
Right.
So soft, empty hand control, I mean, we created a policy advisor report on that, and they changed their policy to adopt soft, empty hand control reporting. What that means is, whenever the police department uses they put their hands on you, not just to like pat you on the back, but I'm talking about like they say that you're resisting or you're not compliant, then they needed to document that. It wasn't something that they were documenting, and and it's not something unique.
Right.
Like a lot of agencies across this country, are reporting that.
Right.
And so I would say that they considered it, and then they also implemented it. So I call that accountability, right?
Another thing that we see, or that we know, or that's a narrative, is disparities in these instances. Disparities will who's getting pulled over, disparities on who's getting arrested for particular crimes. This is crazy outliers, right? During your time with the COB, have you been able to have you all been able to kind of notice these disparities? If, black folks are getting arrested more than white folks, or poor folks are, getting locked up more than people who have money, and all of these things. Have you all been able to address what I would say some of these systemic kind of issues and disparities that, kind of existed in policing for a long time?
Yeah, I think that what we do when we get complaints, we are taking in demographics and data, and we are using that information and comparing it to what we get from the police department to be able to see if there's patterns, and practices that need some attention to.
Right.
And so, but the data takes a couple years to get a good, good
significant,
set
data,
to be able to determine what's happening.
Right.
I will say that. The kind of complaints that we get in when they come in, a person may come in and say, oh, the police pulled me over, gave me a ticket, and, I didn't like the way he talked to me. But sometimes what we're looking at is, why did they pull you over? Like, if what happened during the pullover time?
Right.
Was there policy violations in that? And sometimes that's most times we are doing that, because sometimes I think when a complainant puts the information down, they're only dealing with a very specific thing. But what we're looking for is like the totality of the circumstances, because there might be multiple violations that the complainant can't articulate.
Right.
So we do look at that.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
That's good to know, because we don't, most everyday citizens don't know all the cracks and nannies about the violations.
Mm-hmm.
We just know we feel like something is done
Something's going
wrong,
wrong,
and
right.
it may be because of what I look like.
Right.
And so but then it's like, okay, how do I navigate the decision? Where can I go? Or maybe some of us just say, hey, this is the price that I pay for being this skin color, right?
And and you're right. And I think that that's what this whole process is. It's very transparent. Mm-hmm. You're going to see when we have those types of complaints, right. We put a proposed resolution report online so that anyone can go to our web page and look at those particular complaints.
Right.
The process that in the policies, you'll see what the summary was, what the person came in and said. You'll see the policy violations. Right. You'll see the conclusions, and then you'll see if there was ever some type of sanction given. Right. And so we do that in public, right? Mm-hmm. They tune into our board meetings. You see that whole process worked out publicly.
So we have a new tool that's being implemented for a 6-month pilot here in Nashville that was just voted by our wonderful council. The majority of our wonderful council members here of Nashville, LPRs, license plate readers. Mm-hmm. The COB board, along with a lot of maybe like 15 to 20 other community organizations, recommended these license plate readers not be used as a tool due to kind of lack of oversight, I would say. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on license plate readers? From where you're sitting today as the executive director of the COB?
I think with any type of surveillance tool that you have to have oversight, right? I think that, what we tried to do was to bring people who are experts in the field and talk about disparities, and you're also looking at are there in real time, what does it look like to have oversight over license plate readers? Right. You saw what the board decided to oppose any type of license plate readers. Then there was these bills that were introduced. One bill was including us, another bill was excluding us, in a way that we felt did not give us the opportunity as a staff to be able to really bring significant auditing and monitoring of them. Right. And so now there's this new bill that's going to be introduced on Tuesday that brings us back in, that also, puts us at the same level as the DA and the public defender in having this oversight. Right. Most of our board members are definitely, as far as I know, are on board with us having the ability to audit and monitor those. And so I think that if you have strong policy in place and we are able to help with that, I think that there's this misconception that when we're writing these policies, they're not for us. Right? They're for the police department and the community. Right? And so, it may seem like, and change is always challenging, right? But these policies are to make our police department better, stronger. I think that having, really good policy in place is protection for everyone. Right. And so I think that, as the police department they begin to draft policy, they should think about putting us in that room at that table, because I think that ultimately it's going to help them. Right. And we can do this together. It doesn't have to be a whole lot of heartburn, because this is what we're here for. We're here to help you become the best that you can be.
Are there positives for Nashville, I would say? Are there positives, are there pros to having license plate readers in our city?
Well, I think if you think about the pros, you think of people who, have been, for instance, when you have some horrendous crime, I think that if a license plate reader can help, facilitate and track down someone who has been, pointed out as the person that was the perpetrator. I think
Right.
that could be helpful.
Right.
Right? You don't want people who have committed horrendous crimes out, running
Right.
around and, continuing some,
Right.
type of spree of crime, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think that there is, if you're thinking about it from an advantage point, that would
Right.
be an advantage.
Right.
But in that, it still has to be some safety,
Right.
right? That people who are not, out here committing crimes are not necessarily drug in to that, because I think that license plates are they are an intrusive tool.
Right.
I mean, any surveillance that where we are now is, I think that the whole process of surveillance is increasing,
Right.
in every city across this country. And I think having safeguards in place is the best route that we can do to protect those in our community who are, who might be pulled into this.
Right.
But they're here, right? So how
Right.
do we do that? Like, what do we do to have safety nets and safeguards in place? And
Right.
the way that we do that is to have oversight
Right.
and to have, strong policy.
Right. How did you feel initially when, you saw the LPRs being passed, knowing that, kind of the entity, like one of the strongest entities that was voted to have by the residents, by the citizens of Nashville, they kind of just like said, okay, but we still gonna vote this in. What was your initial thoughts? And in 15 to 20 other organizations, what was your initial thoughts?
Yeah,
on
well, I
that?
thought that, they're not necessarily seeing the big picture here. Like, I mean, there's this push because I think that we can get, like, there's crime, we
Right.
got to get that. But ultimately, I think that when listening to the community, I mean, the whole thing is we have to begin to listen to the community and how they want to be policed.
Right.
And I don't think that happens the way that it should, right? There's always this thing where other people and some people in the high places will say, we know what you need.
Right.
But we really need to be listening to
Right.
the people who are being policed, and
Right.
trust that they know what they want.
Right.
And I don't necessarily think that happens. And I mean, that's just not unique here, but
Right.
that's in most metropolitan cities.
Right.
We have to give credit to our community members that they know what they want
Right.
and listen to them.
Right.
Right?
Right. Today, where does the relationship between the Community Oversight Board and MMPD look like?
I think it's a respectful one. I
Okay.
think that, we have a chief of police who has been definitely different than the last police chief. I think that, one of the things that I think that he's done he has given us access, right, to be able to do our work.
Right.
Where before I felt like, our work was hindered because we did not have access.
Right.
So initially, I think it was super uncomfortable. We are entrusting
Right.
people who are maybe not law enforcement, who we don't know anything about. We don't know what they gonna do. What they gonna do, and what they gonna do with this information that we have,
Right.
right? And when we start talking about transparency, what does that look like?
Right.
Are they going to take everything that we give them? We could be in the middle of an investigation and throw it
Right.
out there and let everybody see it.
Right.
So we had to get some ground rules, right? There's the MOUs in place. In those MOUs, they talk about confidentiality.
Right.
You have to have a staff that understands that,
Right.
But I would say overall, I think that we have a respectful relationship. I think that Chief Drake has really allowed us to be able to do our work by agreeing to give us the things that we need. There hasn't been a time that I've asked for something that I haven't received. So I
good
give
to
them
hear.
credit for that.
Is there any procedures or policies in place, like just one that you may feel that just kind of just needs to change, like expeditiously,
Yeah.
within our MNPD department here in Nashville?
Yeah, I think that of course, right now the mental health issue is a
Okay.
big hot topic.
Right.
How that looks, how that's handled. I think that they're trying to figure that out. Like, how do you respond to a person in crises?
Right.
And what happens next? Because,
Right.
there's sometimes you have people who are homicidal and suicidal.
Right.
But then you might have a person who's not any of those, who's just
Right.
has a mental health issue.
Right.
Right? And may just be having a bad day.
Right.
Right? And not necessarily want to hurt themselves or anyone else.
Right.
How do you respond to them? What do you do? What's the process?
Right.
How do you get them the help that they need?
Right.
So I think that they are working on that, but that would be the thing that I think needs the most attention immediately.
Okay. What does the future of community oversight look like here in Nashville? We're growing. 100 people moving here a day.
Yes.
So more people, I guess you would think more oversight is needed in a way. What does that look like for a growing city like Nashville?
Well, I think we're going to be here for a very long time. Number one, we're in the charter, right?
Right.
But I think that as within the first 3 years, we have been able to determine, where we need to grow and where the deficits were.
Right.
And I think that is why we have a pretty significant budget ask, right? Because we realized that within our agency there were areas that needed attention. We knew that one of the things that I think is important is that adding a social worker to the agency would help with intake. Because I always think like this. I think like if a person has been harmed by the police, or they've been had some type of harm,
Right.
and let's just say that a person they come to us and they say these are the things that happened to me. We have to sit back and evaluate, like, how do we make these people whole?
Right.
It may not be monetary, because it may
Right.
but for instance, I think about if a person came to us and they've lost a loved one in a police encounter.
Right.
And that loved one that was lost was the sole breadwinner. And that wife or that mother or father, somebody comes to us and say, I don't know what to do, right? And we're going to look at, of course, we're going to look at the encounter,
Right.
but what do we do to make that person whole? We need to give them and hook them up with the resources that they need.
Right.
I think that falls on our agency, because they're reaching out to us.
Right.
And that we need to dig a little deeper than
Right.
just a complaint.
Right.
And find out when a community member is harmed,
Right.
what can we do as a metro government agency
Right.
to connect them to the right resources, right? So that's one of the things. The second thing is, having mid-level management so that there's professional growth in our department.
Right.
Looking at the big picture on how this looks 3 years from now, 5 years from now is where
Right.
we are.
Right.
And we've noticed that, we're going to have to make some changes. There's positions that we need. We can't rely on 10 people to do this work.
Right.
If the police department is expanding, they get a ninth precinct, they're going to
Right.
staff it with 150 people. What does that look like for us when
Right.
those 150 people get on the street
Right.
and they have complaints?
Right.
3 investigators ain't gonna cut it.
Ain't gonna cut it
It
at
ain't
all.
gonna cut it. So I think that's what we've had to do. We've had to look at a strategic plan and how we are going to solidify our agency as an institution of metro government.
Right.
And I think that we're in that process now. And I think our future is bright.
Right. And with the budget, is that a mayor's decision with you all's budget, or the monies that is allotted to the COB?
Yeah, that's a good question. So within our charter, we are allotted, or we will receive 1.5 million every year.
Okay.
Right. That's guaranteed. That's written into the charter. But that one fund, that's not enough now, right? Because expansion, inflation. We have to grow as an agency. We cannot stay where we are and be able to service the needs of this community the way that we want to.
Right.
So we are asking for a significant increase. We're asking for more employees, and because you have more employees, you got to have more for like supplies and rent and all of those things. Because I think that the more officers you hire, the greater the need of oversight.
Right. Exactly. Well, look, I learned a lot.
Good,
I learned a lot, and I know for sure if I learned, the listeners and the watchers learn, because I think the COB is a crucial part of our community, and I really want more people to like invest in whatever type of way they can into the COB, whether that's attending the meetings, whether that's talking to staff, and or just even making complaints, right? Making complaints, so you all can take a deeper dive into that complaint and other things that might be had happened that everyday citizens, residents, community members can't articulate, can't see, won't notice, because they focus on what they realize and what's happening. And so I appreciate that work. I appreciate the city of Nashville voting to have the COB here. 100,000 plus people that voted to have the COB here, and I appreciate the work that you're doing and how you started and your journey thus far.
Well, thank you. It's a phenomenal opportunity for me. I'm very humbled to be in this role, serving the community in the way that we're serving it. I love this community. This is my home.
Right.
I've lived here over 25 years, and so whatever I can do to make Nashville better in any capacity, I'm all in on that.
Right.
And so, yeah, I sometimes I think, what more could I do, right? And just keep pushing forward, push, so that residents feel empowered, and that they feel supported and listened to.
Right.
And so that's kind of where we are, right? That's our daily grind, right? To make certain that people, when they encounter us, that they don't leave our presence, without answers and without assistance.
I got one last question for you.
Okay.
And it just came to me. I don't know why it came to me, but it just came to me. You're dealing with police, and you're asking questions about their procedures and their practices and their methods. Have you ever felt threatened? Have you ever felt like a target by the police department? Like people was out to get you? Maybe not in a physical way, but just, whatever way they could get to you to just make your job or life difficult, so you wouldn't be able to have that oversight or implement those procedures and those things that our community needs and, should have when it comes to policing.
Well, I think that in this type of work in general, that's something that always is in your mind. Like they're making this a lot more difficult than it has to be. And then I think that because oversight, I wouldn't say it's controversial, but some people think that, right? That when you begin to have, and I think the way that we talk about oversight and accountability in the wake of George Floyd, and that's in the same midst of when we were getting this started, and there was protest and things of that nature. I do think that there was this, with the police department, and we saw that in real time, where they were stopping the work or making it more difficult. We couldn't have access to records. There was a lot of rhetoric going around that was just absolutely not true. Like to order records, it's going to cost $1 million. It's going to take us 600 days to get this stuff to them. And just misinformation. And at that time, you get really discouraged, and because what can you do? All you can do is use your mouthpiece and continue to keep the community informed and hoping that they get on board and make this push. So yeah, I do think that there were times that we felt, like this wasn't going to be able to, we weren't going to be able to accomplish what we came to accomplish, and that there was, this thing to keep us from getting where we needed to go.
Well, Jill, I appreciate you. I appreciate your resilience and fighting. Is there anything else that you want to leave with our Nashville community listeners and watchers and people all over the world that is listening, watching this, that you want to leave about COB, yourself, and just the continued work that I know y'all are doing?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think that everyone who has committed themselves to this work, whether through a volunteer role on the board or through as a staff, that we are committed to this work, dedicated to it. We appreciate the love that we get from the community. We want to do as much as we can. We want to be out there with the community. We also have a functionality of trying to bridge the relationship between the police department and the community, and working on that is something that we'll have to really get involved with the community to be able to know what it is that they want and how we go about doing that. Because ultimately, we want Nashville to be the model city of what Oversight could look like. And so what does those relationships look like between community, police, and the COB? And so I would leave that with them to think about that, to support us, to come to our meetings. The meetings are once a month on the fourth Wednesday of every month. And then you can find all of our information on nashville.gov and just type in Community Oversight Board. Because there's so much work that we're doing, and I don't think that we advertise it or show it in real time as well as we should, because we've just been working, right? We've been on the grind, right? Been on the grind. But we have worked really hard. Our annual reports are on there. Like if people want to get a peek at the use of firearm report, if they want to look at the complaint process and see how many complaints in the chief's response to those complaints, all of that information is online. So yeah, I'm excited about what's coming. I'm excited about 2022 and the years to come. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time and availability to be here and do this and drop these gems and offer community, some information and some impact and some perspective. So I hope people, take that with them, reflect on it themselves, and be a part of the solution. Yeah. All right. And thank you for your time again, Jill.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
All right.
All right. Till next time.
All right.